So my name is Moriarty, and I am the Assistant Dean International in the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, but also Senior Lecturer in Applied Linguistics. And what I'm going to talk to you about is a second year module, which this year was the first year that we taught this module. So within the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, last academic year we collapsed all of our entry points into one degree program, which is the BA in Arts. And that allowed us to create a subject stream in Applied Linguistics. Meaning, so for the very first time, this autumn I was teaching second years in Applied Linguistics. So we've never taught these materials before. And the module was, that I coordinate is entitled Researching Language. And I felt I had two choices. So I could either go in every week and teach them a different method for researching language and give them various activities to enact those methodologies and do some sort of overall projects, or I could flip it and make them research language. So I did the latter. So I made them, so I came in the first lecture of week one, and I presented them kind of, I guess, in a humanities problem-based learning approach. I said, you have 12 weeks to create a public exhibition about languages in Limerick City. So they had 12 weeks. They had to figure out what they would do, how they would present it, who they'd invite to the presentation, etc. So I did 3 weeks of input on a method called linguistic landscape, which is essentially a multimodal research method for examining the presence of languages in public space. I taught them that method. I then let them off for 3 weeks, where they had to go and collect data in Limerick City Centre. They came back. The following 2 weeks, we analysed that data, we created various different themes, and then we created a public exhibition, which they exhibited all of last week in the Fab Lab in Limerick City Centre, and we invited the Mayor of the city and the council, I always get them confused, the Metropolitan Mayor and the County Council Mayor, and we presented our recommendations to the students presented their recommendations to both of the mayors of the city. And here you have essentially what was was presented on some of the walls across the exhibition. So welcome to our exhibition. This is the label that the students organised themselves. So one city, many languages. It's feminine because in most languages, the language itself is a feminine noun. We went for the image of a woman, and then making Limerick multilingual were the recommendations that the students came up with. So they had done a series of activities where they were looking at particular neighbourhoods that we knew were multilingual. They were looking at the visual language representation, and then they were talking about issues of social inclusion and exclusion. And most of their recommendations actually came from their own analysis of how powerful the presence of English is in the linguistic landscape of Limerick City. Not surprising, English is the dominant language, but the presence of English far outweighed the number of English speakers. So it was overly dominant. This is, I should have mentioned, apologies, this is a joint module, a joint subject stream that is taught between Mary I and UL. So they looked at, so I set the problem for them in the initial phase. As I mentioned, they were taught for 3 weeks how you do this research. But we also spent one of those weeks looking at the census data from 2006 around Limerick City. And what you have here are the zones, so the darker the blue and approaching navy, the most multilingual those areas are. What do you notice about that?
You have a strip in the centre there.
You have a strip right here in the city centre, which, unless we start acting around issues of social inclusion, are going to be ghettos. And that's our main argument. And the students came to that conclusion themselves by reflecting on what they had seen and heard over their 3 weeks of data collection. So here, in these areas of the city, you're approaching almost 50% of the population are migrants to Limerick. So they gathered in total a bank of 1,645 images that we then analysed through various different softwares, looked at the presence of languages. So we found that in total 74% were monolingual signs, predominantly monolingual in English, not always, and 26% of the signs were multilingual. There's Anne-Marie. So the students mapped the signs into 94% were monolingual English, and then you had a series of multilingual signs. So what they did was divide the data once they had analysed it into key themes, and then the exhibition itself was presented as visual images that fall under each of these themes. And we created, or we mapped the space in the Fab Lab as the city centre itself. So you actually walked through the images, and the students were there saying, look, isn't this very interesting? And one, I think for me, as an applied linguist, what was really encouraging was to see the students really engaging with language and understanding things that if I had gone in and thought research methods in languages for 12 weeks, they would never have picked these things up, ever. So for them, one of the most fascinating areas for them was when languages other than English are present, they're generally handwritten. So they're not formalised in any way. So it's not like the government is supporting the presence of other languages, bar Irish, which it has to legally under the Official Languages Act. But that if Japanese or Chinese or Thai or whatever was present, it was in the form of graffiti, handwritten notes, or in the internal space of ethnic food stores. That is the only place a migrant to Limerick sees their language, which is very problematic. Also, what was interesting was their recognition. And again, if I had tried to teach them this for 12 weeks, it would not have happened. Where they came back and they started noticing the presence of various lexical items belonging to what you would call Limerick Irish English, like yurt and gowl and all of these terms, as having an economic value. So I don't know if any of you have seen at the back of the public buses now, there's a big red Virgin Media ad which just said yurt. And if I had tried to teach them about the commodification of linguistic resources and how it happens, they would never have come up with this in a typical 12-week class. They're just some examples of the images that they found. So the Official Languages Act was there. And one of the things they noticed themselves was a lot of tokenism. So again, if I had, which I would generally do in kind of a first-year introduction to multilingualism, I would talk about the fetishization of language. And again, they came up with this idea of token multilingualism. So when you have a sign in Chinese, it's to make that restaurant more authentic. Or you have the use of Hindu script in English to make the restaurant more authentic. Again, concepts that if you try and teach in a typical didactic way, they never would have come up with these ideas themselves. This was inside Dublin, I think, if I'm right. And again, they looked at this kind of commercialization of the Irish language, not actually having a communication function here, but again, it is a product, it is a means through which you can more effectively sell products. So even though I hadn't intended for them to, for one of their learning outcomes to be around the notion of commodification, the economic value of language, it came in there of their own doing, simply through the analysis of all of the images that they had themselves. These, again, I think are particularly interesting. So if you try and teach a class, even of language enthusiasts in applied linguistics or applied languages, about the kind of funny situation of the Irish language, you always come up with the, I like it, but it's taught so badly in school, and you know, I learned it for 13 years, but I can't say anything. And they picked up these themselves as really interesting examples of the transgressive use of the Irish language. So appearing as Cotter Gra, City of Love, and here, Puka, being the Irish for ghost, but again in a script that resembles a ghost-like figure. And these combination of linguistic with semiotic resources was something that they again noticed themselves. And if I had started teaching them about the semiotics of linguistic resources, they would have switched off. Whereas they found it, and then we went back, we put the label on it, and now it is something that makes more sense to them. So one, I think, for me, one of the best outcomes of this module was the recommendations that the students presented to the two mayors of the city and county, where they suggested that we need to start embracing and loving languages. We need to include migrant voices in our public space, make multilingualism an objective of Limerick 2030, embrace multilingualism as a cultural and economic capital, recognise the value in diversity, invite public participation, counteract the use of English, and know more than one language. And of course, it spells
well done, Limerick.
And that, again, was all work that the students came up with themselves. There's no way, if I said, I want you to come up with something really engaging that you have to, if I hadn't left them to their own devices. My final comment is about one particular student who had been struggling with the subject. He absolutely shone in this module because it was creative. He's a creative learner. He really embraced the opportunity to engage with the city centre, to engage with locals in the city centre, and to present this in an artistic way. So I guess one of the advantages of teaching in this way, of flipping the classroom in this way, is to give space to students who otherwise actually probably struggle with some of the very theoretical stuff. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. What I'm going to talk about, so yesterday 55 qualitative analysis reports landed in my Turnitin to be marked. The analysis report is basically the results and discussion section of a qualitative research paper. And what I'm going to talk about actually echoes a lot of what was in the first presenter, what Mairead talked about, on a much smaller scale. Same principle, but on a much smaller scale. So I'm going to talk about how the rationale that led me to doing this particular assignment, my thought process around the design of the assignment, and then some reflections on the experience as well. When I arrived here at Limerick, I was asked to comment on the differences between the sports science program that I had been on and what was here in Limerick. And one of the big things I noticed was that qualitative research methods featured much less here. Now, the obvious reaction to that was, no problem, Phil, you can teach this extra bit of qualitative research methods. So I got an hour's extra lecture, which is all the students had up to their third year. But then I was thinking, well, you know, I've said there needs to be more of a place in this, and one of the suggestions I made was about integrating research methods into the teaching of content modules. So there wasn't a place for it in a research methods module. So is there a way we could integrate the two of them in? And effectively, I had an opportunity at the start of this semester where I got a module last minute. The learning outcomes were perfectly aligned to it. It was about the development of expertise and understanding the scientific methods that allow us to understand that. So here was an opportunity, so I had no choice but to go for it. And this is a really important topic for our students as well in the sports science program. So these are four examples of academies or leagues in the youth sport structure. This is an area where I research and I think is really important, especially when we see terrible ideas like this up on top from the FAI. Things which don't make sense if you have a good understanding of the research and theory. So what I wanted our graduates to do was to understand the research and theory behind good environments, effective environments, and poor ideas and less effective ideas. But with that other thought in mind, it was about this question. Can I get the students to understand the research and theory underpinning effective youth development environments, while directly teaching them the least amount of research and theory about youth development environments. So I said I'd give it a go, and this was the medium that I chose. So effectively, I got sports autobiographies. Now, in the last 3 years, there's been some nice research on sports autobiographies in sport and exercise psychology in particular, and using these as a tool. So that was one advantage. I could give the students some critical reflections on, is this a valuable use or a valuable source of data? Secondly, I could have the students critically evaluate autobiographies as a source of data. There are obviously strengths, because we don't get access to these people very easily, but there are also limitations in terms of the direction, the control that you have over the data that's coming in. So it's a really nice data source to be able to challenge the students to review the method, and it gives autonomy. Students get to choose which autobiographies they want to write about, and that, I think, is a huge element of choice, which I found out over the course of the semester. So this was the source of data I was going to use, and then I had a host of decisions to make. Before I get to the decisions, this is just an example of a section from an autobiography, and it just illustrates how there are different levels that you can read these autobiographies and make connections to research and theory. So on the one hand, the student might read this and go, well, Zlatan practiced a lot. Okay, that puts you right here at the bottom of the scale. But you can say, well, actually, there's qualities in here. It looks like the deliberate practice notions that Erickson's theory talks about. Well, that moves you up the scale a little bit. And then if you zone in and you talk about the rewinding and fast-forwarding and the precise details, well, that's the focus characteristic of the deliberate practice that Erickson's talking about. So again, that's just an extra layer to the interpretation of the text that's being presented. So you can take the raw material, and I can assess how well students understand the research and theory by how well they're able to read into the nuanced details that they see in these autobiographies. This is very big, I appreciate, but just to give an overview of some of the kind of the key elements in terms of what I did. It was in the second half of the module. In week 6, I gave a lecture in a different module on qualitative research. It was basically a workshop where I took a paper that had been done on the development of expertise, and we unpacked the method in that paper to understand the method of qualitative research and the why of qualitative research. And that was my setup into the whole area. And then I came back to the original module. I could have given them no content to begin with, but I was wary about that because I was teaching them a brand new method that they had no experience of whatsoever. I'd read very few qualitative papers up to this point. So I thought, actually, I need to teach in a 3-week block here at least the basic language. I need them to understand, when I say giftedness, talent, what's the difference between those? Diversification, specialization. So when they go to the literature on their own, they speak the language, they know what they're looking for, they can interpret that literature a little bit better. But I got to play around with this, so it was very much videos, terminology, problems, not much teaching content, just understanding the language that we speak in this area. I also had 3 weeks in the lab with them, so we started that off with just building up step by step how you would do a qualitative analysis, qualitative piece of work, starting with what are your current beliefs about the development of expertise, how might that influence your subsequent steps, and then working a template that they could use in their subsequent piece of research, and setting a high-quality method that everyone would work towards. As I said, they would present a results and discussion section. We all wrote the method together in the lab, and it was a shared method which they didn't submit. And that was it. So we had 3 weeks of training on the method, 3 weeks of talking around the language, and then they had 2 weeks where they were bringing in their data at different stages and working in peer groups. And all the time inside the lab, they're working on tasks here, and I'm just floating around, interacting and watching what they're doing and commenting with individuals as they work on their analysis. Critical Friend Part 1, they brought in, say, for example, an autobiography. They gave it to somebody else in the class, said, I want you to read these 3 pages. Did the person get the same quotations? Did they assign the same codes to the quotations? They can have a general discussion about what is similar, what is different there, and understand the process a little bit. The following week we did the same thing, but for how you cluster codes together into themes, themes into higher order themes. So again, they're examining each other's practice in those 2 weeks, but they're working on their data for their assignment. And even here, I gave them some data. It wasn't the greatest data. It was deliberately some decontextualized data. There were some problems with the quotations I gave them, but there was some data there they could use as part of their assignment. So every single thing that they did from this point forwards fed in directly to some element of their assignment. In the lecture for these 2 weeks, so again, content was gone. I did suggest some reading, so these are some general overview areas. This is the Great British Medalist Project, which talks about lots of different factors that might come up in your autobiographies, so have a read of that, but I'm not talking about it. What I did do is I went back to the same paper that I had in week 6, so a nice paper, and in week 10 I took the results section apart, broke it down to all the basic components. In this paragraph, you can split it up and you can see this is the 6 things the author's trying to do. And we made some exercises around getting the students to understand what's required in each section and in each paragraph of the results section. Same applies then next week for the discussion. Just breaking down what a discussion paragraph looks like, the different sections in the discussion. And I just took those apart and gave the students some exercises to do inside the lecture as well. So again, it's not content. Across the 10 sessions that are there, 3 of the sessions were about content. 7 of the sessions were all research methods. And the gamble was, are they going to understand the content better for having purely focused on applying this research method to the data that they've picked from their autobiographies? The last bit in week 12, this is where I was panicking. I was thinking, have I gone too much? Have I pushed them too far? Do I need to rescue anybody? So we had 10-minute slots across all the lecture and labs. They came in, saw me for 10 minutes with their table of themes, and I could either breathe a sigh of relief or do some emergency patch-up work and get everybody on the way to go. And then 6th of December, they handed it all in. So some very quick reflections. This is my teaching philosophy, which was used to guide the design of it and also the reflections come afterwards. Number 1, they saw what I'm interested in terms of the autobiographies that I supplied, the areas that I'm particularly interested in. I saw the areas that they're interested in by the autobiographies they picked to work with. So there's a fantastic opportunity to build a connection there. Working in partnership, that was with me and them, because every single lab, I was walking around looking at what we were doing. I was very conscious about using the word we as much as possible to describe what we were building and how I was helping them to build this resource. Create something tangible. So again, every single lab they walked out with something physically done that was going to contribute towards their end assignment. Every single lab was a step forward and a physical piece that they were going to use. I could have done that a bit better in the lectures in terms of tangible elements. That's something to build on. Develop through affirmation. Again, this was new for them, new method. So really important for me was to say, can I recognize self-best practice? Can I recognize things that they've done really well? See here, we've coded these quotations. That's the best coding that you've got. Can you bring everything else up to that standard? There you're showing me you can do it. Here where you've clustered these into this theme, that's what you want to do. You've got it. This is how you do it. You're showing yourself, here's your template. So really affirming that they can do this, and they're showing examples of that. I'm pretty sure they all recognize they've got a new set of skills. I don't think I celebrated it enough. I got them to recognize it, but I don't think I quite got there with the celebration. One that isn't in my philosophy yet, but I think needs to be in for my long-term sustainability as a lecturer. Did I enjoy the process? And absolutely, it was actually really interesting to interact with students and the different bits they were bringing up. I'm conscious that I'm way over time, so just to say, students found it very challenging. And I was definitely something that came back in informal and formal comments through, but generally they liked it. They did find it a little bit tedious at points in terms of the coding. My reaction to that is good. You've got a realistic insight as to what the nature of this kind of research is. And they also have come out saying they maybe learn more about skills than content. I've got a question mark there because I know they've learned the skills, because I've given them lots of feedback on skills. I haven't given them any feedback on their knowledge of content yet. So I won't know until I see their assignments yet. So I'm not sure if that's accurate or if that's just their ideas. And then I've got a few work-ons for myself, but since I'm over time, thank you very much, and I'll be really interested to hear your questions.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was very interesting. Can you flip back to the previous slide for a second? And will you tell us about the leave it? I think it's worth spending the time, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So they kept a reflexive diary. It's part of a good process in terms of qualitative research methods. I didn't ask them to submit that. I just said this is something that you need to do for the bit that I'm going to assess to be better. If you don't do it, the bit I'm going to assess won't be as good. So I'm wondering whether actually, because they've done all that work anyway, do they just need to include that as an appendix? That would be nice and easy. This is a big piece of work. Some of us, I had people walking in with 8 pages worth of coding in their initial table. They really went to town on it, and that's fantastic for me because I'm looking for 2 things when I'm assessing the results section. The results table, I'm looking for how broad their knowledge is, and the results table, I can see that really easy. How many different concepts within expertise development do I recognize? And then I'm also looking to assess the depth of their knowledge. So in the discussion and in the results write-up, they had to pick 3 of the themes and just talk about those 3 in depth and connect them to theory and research. So that gives me a look at the depth element as well. But that was a big ask to get that done, to produce that in 2,000 words outside the tables and things. So I'm wondering, actually, do I need to stretch this? I could easily run this as a full module, but that's a challenge. I think what they did really well was the initial engagement with the activities and pulling out the codes. I think where I needed to spend a little bit more time was examples of how codes cluster into lower order themes and higher order themes and how that relationship works. I think they definitely needed a bit more time spent on that. So I've got to figure how do I build that into the process. I've got semi-independent reading. So in the week 10, 11, 12, I said, this is when you need to see what's been emerging from your data and find research and theory that links to what you were seeing in your data. I'm not telling you what to do, you just got to go and find it. Because the first half of the module, we did lots of work on finding research. So there, I'm wondering, do I need to structure that a little bit or have some more of an interaction with, if students are saying, this is coming up a lot in my data, and I can go, okay, here's 2 or 3 researchers that are really good in that area. You might want to check out their papers, just to make that section a little bit easier for them, because there's a huge amount of data that they have to manage. And some of the lecture sessions I put online, and I just did them all online because it's just topic-based. And I wonder whether some of the more information, especially in the qualitative research lecture that I gave in week 6, which clashed with the big assignment. So I walked into the room thinking, this is it. I'm going to launch their qualitative research careers here. And I had 16 out of 55 in there because they were all busy finishing up an assignment. So suddenly I'm thinking, actually, that's put a roadblock in, and I had to catch up a couple of places later on. So those are the main kind of work-ons for me in the module.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, my name is Diarmuid Dane. I'm a lecturer in the School of Education, and I mostly teach technology teachers on a 4-year undergraduate program and a 2-year PME program. So the undergraduate programs that I teach on have been, just to maybe give you a little bit of context, the teacher education programs in the university went through an accreditation process about maybe 2 to 3 years ago. And it was a pretty intensive process. UTEB were involved, APRC and the Teaching Council, and it was a real priority for the university that these programs get accredited. And the first programs that got accredited were the technology teacher education programs. So there's 2 4-year programs, and I teach in those. And they were presented by the university as being the Rolls Royce of programs. The Teaching Council said they were great programs, the university said they were great programs. And there was an amalgamation of different departments in the School of Education was formed subsequent to accreditation. And about 3 years ago, there was rumblings around corridors that we teach too much in the technology teacher education programs, and that the teaching hours are going to have to be reduced, even though the programs and the lab hours, they were all accredited by the Teaching Council, and APRC gave them the green light, and the programs were presented as being Rolls-Royce programs. And so the technology education staff weren't too happy that that this was being muted now, that we have too many teaching hours in the programs and that we overteach our students when they've been accredited. And it all came to a head this past September. My head of school brought me in and she said, "Diarmuid, you're teaching too many hours, you're going to have to cut hours in your modules." Now, the module that I teach on for the first year teachers, my module satisfaction scores and my ACT scores are through the roof. I have very high QCAs and very high retention rates. So as far as I was concerned, there's nothing wrong with my modules and the specific first year module I teach on, and there's evidence there that the students really enjoy it. So it was really an economic pressure that was being put on me, that there was a squeeze being put on the pay budget, and that all of a sudden now there's no money to pay for the teaching hours that have all been approved through the different levels. So I had two choices. I either put my hands up and say, well, you're not touching them because it's all been approved and you can save money elsewhere, or else I had to turn around and actually question what I was doing. And the first thing that my head said to me was that, can you cut some of the lab hours? And I said, I can't cut some of the lab hours because I have learning outcomes associated with them. And if I cut the lab hours, I can certainly cut them. But if I cut them, I guarantee you that the grades will reduce, the student experience won't be the same. And it's like, how are you going to find middle ground here? Because you're not going to be happy either way. And then I thought to myself, in terms of the lab hours that students go into, and I said to myself, do all the students need to be in attendance for the labs? And my first thought was that they all need to be there. But then I thought to myself that I could possibly flip the labs. And I could flip the learning environment. And if I flip the learning environment, I can reduce the amount of teaching hours that are required for the module. But then I said to myself, if I flip the learning environment, there are students in my modules that will need that one-on-one interaction with the teachers in the lab. So how can I square that circle? So what I did was I was thinking to myself, yes, how am I going to describe kind of where I'm at? And what I had to do was I had to center myself. So here I am a teaching philosophy that I want to stand behind. I want to have excellence in my teaching. I want my students to have an excellent, outstanding experience. And actually, I have other stuff to worry about as well. I have to do research, I have to sit in committees, I have to develop curriculum, I have to work with teaching councils, I have to work with schools. I have all this stuff to do. Now, I could align totally to the left align with the students and forget about the university. Or I could totally align with the university and focus on my research and cut the hours that they want to cut. Everybody has more money. I could maybe get an easier way of getting promoted, but the students in there want to suffer, are going to suffer. Now, I just want to give a little bit of context in terms of the students. In terms of the classes that I'm talking about, there's 130 plus students. Our lab spaces are very tight. We've only space for 20 students in each of the labs. In our programs, students are in attendance between 30 and 35 hours a week. But all of that was calculated when we were doing the accreditation process. In addition to that, we've mixed abilities, we've mixed interests. And also, in the technology teacher education programs, we have students coming in with ranging from 360 points all the way up to 550 plus points. So there's a big spread there. So how do you cater for those? In terms of the university, we've increasing student numbers across the board. There's a squeeze being put on in terms of not only the cost of teaching, but also our space limitations, also our budget limitations. And in addition to that, we've dealing with teaching council, and we have strategic plans, etc. So what I'm proposing, and I'm kind of proposing this generically, especially for large class groups where there's a squeeze being put on teaching. I'm proposing that rather maybe even, I think I look at the first 3 weeks rather than the first 7 weeks, especially with first years. Because in the modules that I teach on, the first years don't go into labs until week 3. So I have space in the first 2 weeks. I can make serious ground in the first 2 weeks. And what I do in the very first week of the program, I measure students in terms of their potential to get into difficulty during their 4 years using a particular metric. So the metric that I use is a spatial skills metric. It's a technology teacher education program. It's very important that they're able to spatially manipulate and understand spatial information, and it's a very good indicator as to how they're going to get on. It's internationally proven through the research. That's just for my discipline. So for example, I don't have to measure their ability in terms of creative writing. It's a different discipline. These are technology teachers, technical based. So I give them that test in the very first week. And I can categorize them straight away. I know straight away which of the students are going to struggle. But not only do I measure that, but I also set a tone from the very first week where I give them in-class formative assessments in the lectures. And those formative assessments are around work that I expect the students to do every week, reading, pre-reading, and also their engagement in the actual lectures and the labs that take place. By the end of the week 2, at the start of week 3, I have a decision made in terms of I know straight away the students that are going to struggle, and I know the students that need support for labs, and I know the students that can do their labs independently in a flipped environment. And I can make that judgment straight away. And what I do is, so I just have this chart in here. So this is, I've been doing this for the last 5 years. I categorize them, and I can tell straight away which of the students are going to struggle. And they're very homogenous. Our students, our Leaving Cert students that come in here year in, year out, they're pretty similar in terms of this spatial skills test that I give them. It ranges from 67 to 69% every year, year in, year out. So, but that's no surprise coming from the same system. They're coming from the same Leaving Cert system. Generally, they have the same subjects covered, and so it's no surprise that their scores are this. And not only that, so what I do is these are just, I just took a screen grab of the first 25 students, and these are formative assessments I give in the lectures. And I can see, so you can see straight away. See the very first formative assessment. A lot of learning to do. They're like, oh, this is a totally different kettle of fish here. In terms of, but you can see straight away how they aligned with my expectations, and you can see the change. So the people that got red initially, they learned straight away and they're greens. But if we just look at these, and this is just a sample that I just picked from my Excel screen. This student is struggling. So he has a red, or she has a red, an amber and a red. This student is also struggling, 2 reds and 2 ambers. And this student is also struggling here. They have a red and 2 ambers. This student, at the end of week 5, came to me and said, we had a real chat, and I think that we have a responsibility as academics inside here as well. That especially those first years in the first few weeks, that like it's okay to change your mind about what you're doing, especially when you're on a teacher education program. And this student came into me, I red flagged him. I gave him the finger and I said, you need to call into me. Because the test that I gave him in week 1, he was at risk, and also he's at risk here as well in terms of the formative assessments. He ended up taking the decision to drop out, and he was so happy, so relieved, because he was on the wrong program. This other student, this student here, was also at risk in terms of the spatial skills test that I gave them, and it's no surprise they're struggling here, but that student has now come through. A couple of these, they would have had to repeat 2 or 3 times before they got the green, but they got there. And this student here was also at risk in terms of the spatial skills test as well. So, this student needs to be supported, this student needs to be supported, and this one here. And what I advised them to do was come into some of the labs. Whereas the student, for example, see the student here, greens across the board, there was some of the lab time that they did independently in the flipped environment. So what effect does it have? This is just in a nutshell. For this module, I had 28 hours of labs. Rather than having 28 hours of labs where you had to pay for a teacher in terms of what my head is worried about, in terms of 28 hours, I reduced the 28 hours down to 18 hours of teaching, where 10 of these hours were now assigned independently. And 4 of the hours were supported. So I identified the students that needed to be supported, they had flexibility in their timetable, and they all came into the labs. So I freed up 10 hours of teaching. My head thought it was the best thing ever. But in addition to that, the students that needed the support got the support. The students that could work independently worked independently. And now, at the end of the day, my teaching philosophy was upheld. I was happy, because that's what I care about, is the students that struggle. All students, but particularly ones that struggle. My head was happy, because there was money saved. And in addition to that, the students, I'm now promoting students to become responsible, proactive, and collaborative from day 1 in first year. Whereas previously I was minding them all. and I was making them all go into the labs. And then they became very reliant on me, whereas now you're encouraging them to be proactive. It empowers students. I give them flexibility in their timetable. Now all of a sudden they have 2 hours freed up in their timetable that they can do that in the weekend or whenever they want, and that's very important. Whereas previously we had 35 hours a week where it was restricted. You better go into these labs. And we must remember that we live in an environment where students have part-time work, and they have to have a life outside of their studies and their classes as well. And the other thing then is students who require support will receive support. In terms of the university, a 30% reduction in teaching hours. That's huge. Now all of a sudden that frees up space for teachers to give formative feedback, to work with students independently, and also for me to engage in other activities. I expect there's going to be improved retention as well, because now all of a sudden I'm developing these graduate attributes that maybe I wasn't necessarily developing initially before. There's more space in the labs. The labs aren't being used as much now because the students aren't there and it's in timetable classes. And overall, I expect that the quality of graduates and the student experience will improve as well. So that's my kind of take on it. So I just wanted to kind of share that message today in terms of, do you know what, we can center ourselves as academics. And we have to acknowledge that, you know what, we are going to be squeezed from the top. We have pressures coming from the bottom. And rather than aligning one way or the other, I think we can center ourselves, but we have to come up with a way of actually doing that. So, so that's it.